Okay, hi, I'm Wesley Dunbar. I'm here with Communications 3060 doing the final interview, an interview with an interviewer. I'm here with an Aaron Muranaka. He's a lawyer, so say hello.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking to him for the next bit. We're going to be talking about lawyer stuff. So, all right, let's get started, Aaron. So, what is it that you do?
Right now, I'm a law librarian at Jones Waldo Holbrook McDonough. Before that, I was a lawyer for 5 years in California. I worked for 3.5 years at a firm called Foley and Lardner in San Diego, and then just about a year at a firm called Carroll Burdick and McDonough in San Francisco. Um, we were out in California, and then my wife and I had a little boy and wanted to move back to Utah, where we're from, and I wanted to have a job with a little bit better hours, so ended up being a law librarian, which has been great.
Oh, nice. So, do you conduct any interviews as part of your job back as a lawyer?
As a law librarian, I really don't get much opportunity to conduct interviews, but during my 5 years as a lawyer, conducted quite a few different types of interviews. I was on the hiring committee at one of my firms and conducted a lot of interviews as part of that with job applicants. Also, we interview clients as part of being a lawyer, and then as part of getting ready for trial, we conduct a special type of interview called a deposition, which is sort of a formal interview where you interview a witness prior to calling them at trial.
Oh, okay, so can we go through those, the
Sure.
job interviews?
Yeah.
What kind of prep work did you put in for a job interview?
Job interviews, we would have applicants apply to the law firm. Usually they would submit their resume, and then we would screen out applicants for that. And then we usually select about 4 people to call back. They'd interview with 4 attorneys at the firm, and then usually go out to lunch with a couple more. So it's a pretty extensive interview process. In terms of preparation, we didn't do a whole lot. I always look over their resume just to see, where they went to school, what their grades were. Most everyone who's applying to these firms was pretty qualified in that regard. So just sort of give the resume a look, probably about 10-15 minutes. For that sort of activity, it's kind of hard to find time when you're being a lawyer because you're so pressed for time with other things.
Sure, sure. So did you have a set number of questions you'd want to ask someone?
For the interview, we really didn't. The interviews were anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, and everyone who came in, like I said, was pretty academically qualified, so the most important thing was just get a sort of feel for them as a person and make
Sure.
sure they'd be someone you want to work with.
Sure.
When you're an attorney, you work long hours. You often the people you work with, you see more than your family even, so you want to make sure that
Yeah.
the person you're hiring is someone you want to work with and spend a lot of time with.
Okay. You also mentioned, client interviews, of course, as a lawyer. So, what kind of prep did you do for that?
So I was a younger associate at the law firms I was at. I just started out. I worked at them right out of law school, so didn't get to interview some of the larger clients right off the bat. But one opportunity where I had a chance to interview clients was for I worked on a couple pro bono cases. And those are cases law firms do for free for poor, indigent clients who can't afford services. And so I did the initial client interviews for those.
Okay. Uh, why did they do pro bono work?
So, as part of being an attorney and being a law firm, just part of the commitment is giving back to the community.
Okay.
And so you do pro bono work. It's free work you do. Usually it's referred from nonprofit legal agencies like Legal Aid, or
Okay.
then in San Diego there was a nonprofit called Casa Cornoy that would refer immigration work to us. So they would refer those clients in. We had a couple cases. One came through Legal Aid, and it was a woman who she was in the Philippines. Her husband from America came over when he was 65 and married her when she was 17. He brought her.
Wow.
Yeah, he brought her to the United
Jeez.
States and then just sort of isolated her. He kept her alone in the house. They lived in really poor conditions. He didn't let her go
Jeez.
out. She didn't let her learn English, and so years down the road, she eventually made friends with a neighbor and figured out, this isn't how I should be treated, and then she filed for divorce. So that was one case we had.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In terms of getting ready for those interviews or just interviews in general with a client, there's not a whole lot of prep that goes in. Usually you do initial client intake, so if it's normal case, your assistant will do that. Or in the case of a pro bono case, the nonprofit that's referring will send you over some preliminary information. You'll get their name, their address, and a brief description of their case, and you review that, but the most important thing is when you sit down with a client and interview them. So in terms of, getting back to your initial question, in terms of prep, probably 15 to 30 minutes to review the case, but most of the learning about the case and the client comes during the actual interview itself.
So did you have any questions you just kind of asked everyone, or like a set number of questions you ask people?
I wouldn't say during a client interview there's any set questions you ask, but there are certain things you always want to find out about. You want to find out about what brought the client there. Going to a lawyer is a big step.
Yeah.
People have conflicts all the time, but they often don't get a lawyer involved. So
Yeah.
you want to find out what brought them to you, and then you want to find out what the best resolution for their problem is, or what their ultimate goal is.
Yeah.
And that varies. For a contract dispute, it could be, I want my money back, or I want out of the contract, or even I want the contract reformed. Or in the case of the pro bono client I mentioned, she wanted a divorce, but she also had some very special needs that were peculiar to her case because she had limited English skills. She'd been isolated for a long time, so the most important thing for her was to not only get a divorce, but to get enough money where she could attend school and become self-sufficient on her own.
Oh, sure. Okay. And the last kind of interview you mentioned was the depositions.
Yes.
So what's that about?
So, if you sue someone, before you go to trial in larger cases, and not every case, but you have the opportunity to conduct something called discovery. And that's a chance to ask the other side questions. And you can do that a few different ways. You can send them written questions. You can ask them to admit things, or you can ask them questions in writing. And another thing you have an opportunity to do is to conduct a deposition. And those can be of the other party, a witness, the other party plans to call a trial, or sometimes experts will provide testimony, and you can do a deposition of the expert as well.
So did you have a different strategy depending on who you're talking to, like an expert versus just a witness? Or?
Yeah, it varied quite a bit. The expert depositions were quite a bit harder. The expert, you don't always call an expert in every case.
Sure.
But in certain cases where expert testimony would be helpful, for example, maybe a patent case where the expert could testify about when the patent was developed or the type of invention, an expert will get called, and they prepare a report beforehand. So you want to read that report, usually go over it with your own expert to find questions that vary. So the preparation's different for the different types of witnesses, for sure.
Okay, for sure. Do you have any questions that you would prepare for these different kinds of depositions?
You definitely prepare different questions for these depositions. You usually get a half a day or a full day with the witness, and you don't get more than that. So you want to make sure you go over everything. So we'd usually spend, you'd make an outline of all the questions you want to ask. You'd review all the documents, make sure you had them with you in case you wanted to bring documents. So it's a pretty labor-intensive process. I'd say for most depositions, you probably spend anywhere from 5 to 10 hours preparing.
Oh, wow.
And for an expert deposition that could be crucial to your case, you might even spend more time.
Wow, that's a lot of time.
Yeah.
I guess that's your job, though, so you better do it right.
Yeah, and since you only get a certain amount of time, you want to make sure you cover everything.
Yeah, sure. All right, well, do you have any just interview strategies in general that could help me in the future?
Sure. One thing that was helpful in all the different types of interviews I did, the job interviews, the client interviews, or the depositions, is we'd always ask open-ended questions.
Okay.
So sort of broad questions that would elicit, you want to get your interview subject to talk.
Yeah.
In all those situations. In the job interview, you want to get to know them a little better. In the client interview, you want them to feel comfortable and learn about their problems. And in the deposition, you want them to give you as much information as possible. And even though they might be in an adversarial position to you, you also want them to feel comfortable with you, so
Sure.
they don't feel guarded, and so they can, tell you all the facts you need to know. So
Mhm.
open-ended questions are great for that. And then based on what they tell you, you take notes or just keep track of it in your head, and then you follow down. One way I heard it described is sort of a funnel approach. You start with a broad open-ended question, and then whatever their answer brings up, you follow that down until there's sort of nothing left at the end of the funnel.
Okay. Okay. So, did you spend much time in court interviewing client? Like
Um,
doing a court?
you could in court you would have someone on the stand, and
Yeah.
that's sort of akin to an interview. I never actually went to a full-blown trial. Nowadays, most cases settle
Yeah,
beforehand.
I think I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like they say like 90% of cases settle. So I never
Yeah.
actually got to interview someone at trial or put them on the stand and take their testimony.
Okay. 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 So, do you have any? What are some just good questions to ask, or versus some bad questions? Do you know?
Um, Off the top of my head, I can't think of good versus bad questions. And
Okay.
specifically, I think maybe the way you structure your questions can be good or bad.
Yeah.
You want to ask open-ended questions that'll elicit a response.
Okay.
In most
Yeah.
of the situations, leading questions you probably don't want to ask in these particular types of circumstances.
Okay. Sure.
And by leading questions, I mean a question that suggests a yes or no answer,
Okay.
because you want to get people talking.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Okay. So, I think that's about all I have here. I think. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, I appreciate you coming in and asking to interview me. It's been fun.
Okay. Well, I'd like to ask, as one interview to another, how did I do in this interview?
Good.
Okay, good.
I feel like I might have talked too much, but maybe that's because you asked too many good open-ended questions. So
Well, all right, that's good. That'll be good for my grade. All right, I'd like to thank you for joining me.
all right, thank you.
Okay, you can say goodbye.
Bye.
Okay. Okay, that's all for this assignment here. I'll see you in class.